The United States and Israel are at a crossroads and an historic special relationship. Joining us now with reaction to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's speech before a joint session of Congress is Newsmax global political analyst Fred Fleitz. Fred, thanks so much for being here.
Good to be here, Kathleen.
Well, Netanyahu's speech seemed like a presidential State of the Union address. He was interrupted by applause dozens of times. What was Netanyahu's message to President Obama?
Frankly, I thought the speech was Reaganesque. It was incredible. To see a great orator speak like this is really quite a privilege. Netanyahu is capping off his trip to the United States with this speech and his AIPAC speech, and he's also getting in the last word on this dispute that began with the president's Middle East speech last week, where he endorsed the 1967 borders as the end state of a Middle East peace process, which the Prime Minister promptly rejected. Last night at AIPAC, Netanyahu was gracious, praising the President and his support for Israel, but he also made it clear that Israel has serious security concerns, and he did the same thing today. I think he was even more gracious.
Netanyahu repeatedly reaffirmed the bond between the U.S. and Israel and said Obama agrees that returning to the 1967 borders isn't going to happen. Why do you think Obama originally took this adversarial approach last week before backpedaling during Sunday's speech before AIPAC?
Basically, when the president made that speech, the Middle East peace process was already essentially dead. His Middle East peace envoy, George Mitchell, had not been to the region since last December. Hamas and Fatah, the two Palestinian Authority factions, formed an agreement without telling the United States, which they did secretly with Egypt. And then the president sprung this agreement out of nowhere. I frankly don't know why this came about, but it does seem that the president has backtracked from this agreement since he made this statement.
Netanyahu said the conflict with the Palestinians has always been about the Palestinians not recognizing the Jewish state. He said he would recognize a Palestinian state, but said that the Palestinians need to turn their backs on Hamas. So where does the peace process go from here?
Well, the peace process is in serious trouble. And I think the end result of what we saw over the last few days, the peace process was already in bad shape. The president made a speech that outraged Prime Minister Netanyahu and forced him to basically call the president out during the joint appearance at the White House, then his speech yesterday at AIPAC and today. And frankly, a lot is taking place in public that should probably be taking place in private negotiations. And I think that probably hasn't advanced a process that was already in serious trouble.
Fred, Iran was a major theme of Netanyahu's speech. He spoke firmly about Iran not being able to get nuclear weapons and how the U.S. is helping keep the pressure on Iran. Did it seem like Netanyahu was hinting for a stronger approach?
He spent an inordinate amount of time on the threat from Iran, that Iran is a sponsor of terror, that Iran has a nuclear weapons program. And I think this emphasis from Netanyahu's perspective was to try to focus on real-term threats and something that needs to be dealt with right now. Now, Netanyahu praised the president for pushing for a resolution in the United Nations, a sanctions resolution, and that sanctions were passed in Congress. Well, this was a nice thing to say, but the truth is that the president and this administration were dragged kicking and screaming to approving sanctions against Iran in the UN and through Congress. And there are sanctions right now, but frankly, Mr. Obama is not responsible for it. And I think in the end, what Netanyahu is pushing for is that he wants the United States to make it very clear to Iran that everything is on the table in responding to Iranian violence and sponsorship of terror. And given the Obama administration's preference for negotiations and for not confronting terrorist states, especially Iran, that hasn't been clear. And I think Netanyahu would like the United States to clear that up.
Okay, you spent 25 years with the CIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, the U.S. Department of State, and the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. Netanyahu denounced terrorism, saying militant Islam is a danger for everyone. Why doesn't Obama recognize that? Or if he does, why won't he acknowledge it?
It seems as if this administration tried to come in as the anti-Bush and to try to resolve all the world's problems through negotiations and not confronting states like North Korea and Iran and state sponsors of terror. I'm hopeful that there's a trend that is wearing off.
All right, last question real quickly, Fred. You served as Chief of Staff to Ambassador Bolton and as a senior advisor to former House Intelligence Ranking Member Pete Hoekstra. How would you advise Congress, and the White House for that matter, on addressing U.S.-Israeli interests in a Mideast that's been undergoing a dramatic transformation?
I think the president put congressional Democrats in a really difficult position with his statement last week on the 1967 borders. But I think this issue was resolved yesterday by Harry Reid's statement at the AIPAC conference, when he said that no one should impose premature parameters on borders. Now, in addition to the fact that Reid did not endorse or say anything nice about the president during the entire speech, this statement is an incredible rebuke to the president's approach to the Middle East peace process of last week. And I think he has provided a way forward for pro-democratic members of Congress to respectfully back away from the president's position and ask him to rethink where he is. And I think the Netanyahu government is aware of that. I think John Boehner, who also spoke at the AIPAC conference last night, I think he was aware of that, and he didn't find it necessary to harp too much on what the president has said. So I think Congress's role right now is to engage with the Obama administration to come up with a reasonable approach to Israel and to simply move away from what the president said last week on the 1967 borders.
All right, Newsmax global political analyst Fred Fleitz, thank you so much. We appreciate your insight.
Thank you.